I am with Scott Peck, the Executive Director and Curator of the Museum of Biblical Art today, and this is the famous Michelangelo collection, is that correct?
It is. It is a fantastic collection. You know, as I've studied Michelangelo, there's so much literature about him, and now I'm convinced he was really the greatest artist in the history of Western civilization. His work was amazing and monumental. He was everything from a great painter, we all know the Sistine Chapel and the achievements there, the great architect who designed St. Peter's and others, but then the great sculptor. And so we're privileged to have now 19 Michelangelo sculptures here at the museum. It's an interesting story. You may ask, how are you getting Michelangelo here in the United States? Because he didn't have that much sculpture, and it's in Europe, and they're not going to release any. Well, it's an interesting story that has everything to do with World War II. Mussolini knew that war was coming because he was helping start the war with Adolf Hitler, and he commissioned the greatest foundry. Foundries are places where you cast bronze and sculpture out of metal. The greatest foundry at the time was the Marinelli foundry, and great-grandfather Marinelli was a loyal fascist, and he took the cue from Mussolini, and he created molds of all the great masterpieces because Mussolini was afraid that they would be destroyed, and he wanted to recreate them if they needed to be. Well, lo and behold, these molds were stored into caves, and they lasted through World War II. In the last 10 or 15 years, a limited number of casts have been allowed to be made. And we're privileged to have the first edition of many of these casts. And they're actually under the authority of the Casa Buonarroti, the house of Michelangelo. His last name was Buonarroti. They have given their blessing and actually call these to be actually originals in that sense. Original bronzes taken from the, many times the marble. Most of these are in marble. And you'll see the great Moses with the crown of horns that are upon his head. That's due to a mistranslation. Renaissance artists were using the Septuagint. All the clergy was using the Septuagint, which was the Greek version of the Old Testament. And that story where it says Moses came down off of Mount Sinai and his face shone like white or like light, it was mistranslated to say he had horns on his head. So all the great masterpieces, whether it be Leonardo or Caravaggio or any of these artists, would portray Moses with horns. But it's interesting that even Chagall, out of homage to the great masters, would always create his Moses with horns, even though he knew it was a mistranslation. We have the great late Pietas, the round tondos, the great Bacchus. Even the Greco-Roman sculpture of Michelangelo was designed to teach Judeo-Christian ethic. It would take you 2 or 3 weeks to go throughout all of Europe to see these sculptures. You'd be traveling all over the place, but you can see them all here. We even allow you to draw them, so in case you're interested in studying art or want art lessons, we actually provide them on demand here at no extra charge. We will allow sketch artists to come in and draw these Michelangelos where you wouldn't have access in Europe to this kind of work.